Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday morning with us today in order to learn more about the Common Core education standards and the important changes that they bring to Idaho public schools. My name is Valerie Candelaria, and I currently serve as the president of the 912 Project of Idaho. And for those of you who are not familiar with our group, we can best be described as a nonpartisan citizens advocacy group that focus on bringing public awareness to varying issues that we feel are important to the community. Early this year, we began hearing concerns about the newest version of education reform called Common Core state standards. And we learned that it was not just something being proposed, but that it was already here. And after being contacted by a young Idaho mother of 7 who had already begun researching Common Core on her own, we realized quickly that it was something that we needed to learn more about. And that was the beginning for us. There was much, much more to come. And it's been a long, steady trail of research and study ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the young mother who sparked our decision to get involved, Stephanie Zimmerman.
I feel a little goofy being up here because this is not something that I'm accustomed to doing. I started out the mother of 7 when I started this, and I'm now the mother of 8. I started researching Common Core last summer and fall, and probably in about the end of September I was really disturbed by what I read and started contacting people, and one of the first people I came in contact with was Robbins here, and they sort of put me on a path to organize this group, and it's taken me a few months, but as I read through things on Common Core, I quit sleeping at night, and I didn't think it was fair that if I wasn't sleeping at night that any of you were. So I'm glad you're all here. But so last fall I put together sort of a couple of Facebook pages, and then this last spring I put together the website, Idahoans for Local Education, and right before I got that put together I met Val, and she's been instrumental in helping put this together too. So this is something very real for our family, and having 8 children, it affects their future.
Okay. I have to read my words. So now here we are. We are more than 2 years down the road to the Common Core education reform. With implementation now only 1 month away, it's only through sheer public insistence that we are finally facing or forcing the conversations that we should have been having from the very beginning. And we wonder why it's taken so long, and we wonder why it's taken a concerted effort on the part of individual parents to learn about all the aspects of Common Core. Well, through our research, much of what we've discovered in recent months points to questionable motives and even some dubious acts that are clearly not in the best interest of Idaho students, families, or taxpayers. So listen, please. I want to play a quick video for you. I'm sure you've all seen it, but I want you to listen to the message being portrayed here.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have, because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families, and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
There it is. Did you hear the message? These are the people that believe that it takes a village to raise a child. And this is the mindset of those that have brought Common Core national standards to America. And it seems to be less about academics and children than it is about centralizing control of education, and thereby controlling America's future. Yet when we ordinary citizens began to ask questions of our elected officials and engage in public debate, we were marginalized due to our obvious lack of expertise on everything education. And so by default, our state superintendent has been granted the only legitimate opinion in the matter. And so for this reason, we found ourselves in need of some expertise of our own. And much to our relief and to our delight, they're here today to share their expert opinions about all matters Common Core. Each of them has been engaged in the Common Core initiative since its inception, and we're pleased to introduce them.
All right. On the end there is Jane Robbins, and I've got to tell you, she has a very special place in my heart. She was one of the first that I talked to. But I was very newly pregnant and not feeling very well, and she was very kind and very patient. But she is an attorney and a senior fellow with the American Principles Project in Washington, D.C. In that position, she's crafted federal and state legislation designed to restore the constitutional autonomy of states and parents in education policy and to protect the rights of religious freedom and conscience. Her essays on these topics have been published in various print and online media. With Emmett McGrody, she co-authored Controlling Education from the Top, Why Common Core is Bad for America. And that was my first primer into Common Core. That's where I sort of really started digging in. She has written numerous articles about the problems with Common Core and has testified about the issue before the legislatures of 6 states. She is a graduate of Clemson University and the Harvard Law School. And then we have Sandra Stotsky. She was a professor of education reform at the University of Arkansas and held the 21st Century Chair in Teacher Quality. She retired in December 2012. She served as a Senior Associate Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from 1999 until 2003, where she was in charge of developing or revising all the state's K-12 standards, teacher licensure tests, and teacher and administrator licensure regulations. She served on the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education from 2006 to 2010, appointed by Governor Mitt Romney. She served on the National Mathematics Advisory Panel from 2006 to 2008, appointed by Secretary of Education Margaret Spellings. Most recently, she served on the Common Core Validation Committee from 2009 to 2010. She was also an editor of the NCTE's premier research journal, Research in the Teaching of English, from 1991 to 1997. She has published extensively in professional journals and written several books. And then we have Zeev. Did I say that right? Okay. Zeev Werman. And he is a visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution. From 2007 to 2009, Werman served as a senior advisor at the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development in the U.S. Department of Education. Throughout the development of the Common Core standards in 2009 and 10, he analyzed its mathematic draft standards for the Pioneer Institute and for the state of California. In summer of 2010, he served on the California Academic Content Standards Commission that reviewed the adoption of the Common Core for California. In the late 90s, Werman participated in the development of California Mathematics Content Standards and Framework and served on the Mathematics Content Review Panel for California state tests since its inception in '99. He has published professional and opinion articles about education and about the Common Core. In his non-educational life, he is an executive with Monolithic 3D, a Silicon Valley semiconductor startup. And I should also mention that in all my research, California has had one of the best mathematics programs in the nation in the last few years, so I guess he's to blame for that.
I wish I were. Only part.
Well, if you get part of the blame for it, that's pretty good, too. So first we're going to hear from Jane Robbins. Where do I start it out? Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. This is a great turnout. You never know how many people are going to show up, especially in the summertime. So I am delighted to see everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come here. I told them that the only thing I knew about Idaho was Napoleon Dynamite and a blue football field. So, but it's beautiful. I love it. It's beautiful. Okay, this is not going up.
That's page up. You want page down.
I want page down. Duh. Okay. Computers. Okay. We're going to go through this pretty quickly because we don't have a lot of time and we've got a lot of territory to cover. I did want to read something. The Melissa Harris Perry thing reminded me of something. This was called the Gordon Commission. The Gordon Commission was this group that came up with this report about testing and how we ought to be doing testing in 21st century America. And one thing that they said, the notion that education must be locally controlled is deeply ingrained in our nation's culture and educational politics. And they talk about how that means you've got to do everything locally. And they say, because they don't like this idea, they said the Common Core standards and the rethinking of assessment that they are fostering provide an opportunity to challenge this deeply held belief in local control. So we have an opportunity to lose our local control. Okay, if you didn't know what Common Core was, it's not that you weren't paying attention. You weren't supposed to know what it was. It was designed that you wouldn't know what it was, so that this could be implemented quickly and quietly and under the radar, and it would be a done deal, horses out of the barn, all that, and they would get what they wanted, and you would never know about it. So what is the Common Core standards? Zev told me not to be political about this, but I didn't have time to change the slide, so I'm sorry, Zev. Some people have referred to it as Obama Core. Obama did not write the standards. We'll get to that. But anyway, it is very much supported by the Obama administration, and they are doing everything they can to make sure that it happens. What is it? It is a set of K-12 school standards in English language arts and math. And the English language arts standards also encompass what they call literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. So that's the way that content from those other areas is going to come in through the English class. Okay, the thing to remember here is that none of this is new. There have been people in the country who have wanted a national curriculum for decades, and they've tried it. You may remember, if you're old enough, back in the 90s, there was a set of national history standards that some people did. And the history standards were so anti-American and so politically correct that everybody hated them, and Lynn Cheney blew the whistle on it, and the U.S. Senate passed a resolution against these history standards 99-1. I always wondered who the one was. I looked it up. It was the senator from Louisiana who thought the resolution didn't go far enough. So these standards were so bad that the people who were promoting them got slapped down, and they backed up a little bit, and they said, okay. So they learned some things from this. They learned that you don't go through a legislature, because people tend to ask questions if you do that. They learned that you don't call them national or you don't call them federal, you call them state. You call them state-led. And you don't start with something controversial. You don't start with history. You start with English and math, because what could go wrong? It's just English and math. All right. Who's involved here? As I said, the U.S. Department of Education did not write these standards. And the proponents of Common Core are always accusing us of misstating that the federal government created these standards. We've never said they created the standards. They didn't. Who did? There are three main players here. One is the National Governors Association, one is Council of Chief State School Officers, and one is a group called Achieve. The NGA and the CCSSO are two private trade associations in Washington. They do not have a grant of legislative authority from any state to do anything. We don't even know who's in the National Governors Association. They claim all governors are in it, but we know a lot of governors, or some governors don't pay dues, and they don't go to the meetings because they don't like it. We know Nikki Haley of South Carolina doesn't do it. We know Rick Perry doesn't do it. They won't release a list of who's in it. They just like to say that they're all in it. Council of Chief State School Officers is all the Tom Lunas of the world, the chief state school superintendents. But they're private trade associations. They are connected, NGA is connected with a group called Achieve. It's a nonprofit. Achieve was created some time ago to work on state standards, and now it's doing national standards. So these are the groups that were involved in creating these national standards. All of this was going on when the vast majority of people in the country had no clue what was going on, and I would wonder how many governors knew this was going on. I know some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. Where's the money coming from? The standards were not financed by the federal government, but they had somebody who has just about as much money, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation has currently spent over $170 million on primarily promoting the standards, less on creating them than it has on promoting, on the marketing campaign. And how it has done this is that it essentially gives money to a lot of other groups to get them to come on board. So when you hear that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a big proponent of Common Core, look to see how much money they've gotten from the Gates Foundation. One of their affiliates has gotten millions of dollars from Gates to promote Common Core. The Fordham Institute in New York, which is a supposedly right-leaning think tank, is huge in Common Core. They're just complete proponents of Common Core. They've had they've taken $6 million from the Gates Foundation, so they are essentially the paid lobbyists for Common Core. But the proponents will cite everything that Fordham says. Well, Fordham says that these standards are great. Fordham says this will be no problem. But Fordham is the lobbyist, so take that for what it is. But anyway, Gates has given money to the National PTA, it's given money to teachers' unions, it's given money to the College Board, it's given money. It has invested wisely, and it's getting a return on its investment. Okay, so how is the federal government involved? Well, it goes back, there's some dispute about how far it goes back, but we can, for our purposes, we'll go back to the stimulus bill. Remember that? The stimulus bill from 2009. Where they spent $1 trillion or whatever for no apparent purpose. In the stimulus bill, there were several things. There was a state fiscal stabilization fund that states could access some money. This was during the recession, and everybody was concerned they didn't have any money. So, and states had to agree to do certain things in education, sort of more vague things about standards and data collection and that sort of stuff. But the rubber hit the road with the Race to the Top program. The stimulus bill created a $4.35 billion earmark, essentially, for the U.S. Department of Education. And what they did with it was create the Race to the Top program. Race to the Top is a program in which they take our money and then they give us the opportunity to get some of it back. We have to compete for it. So it was a competitive grant program. To be competitive in Race to the Top, you had to agree to do certain things. One, you had to agree to adopt the Common Core standards. Now, they did not call them the Common Core standards, but the way they described what you had to agree to, the only thing that fit was the Common Core standards. You had to agree to be involved in a national assessment of your kids under the Common Core standards. You had to agree to enhance and expand your student data collection, which we will talk about later on in the program. The timeline is interesting, and you need to understand this. In November 2009, the Race to the Top application was released. The application was due in January 2010. And when I say an application, it's not like a 2 or 3 page thing. The states submitted hundreds of pages of what they were going to do with this Race to the Top money. Some of those applications were financed by the Gates Foundation. I know that Georgia's application was financed by the Gates Foundation, and we were rewarded with $400 million, which was one of the worst things that ever happened to Georgia education, but that's another story. So, the Race to the Top application was due January 2010. Now, in most states, almost all states, what doesn't happen between November and January is that the legislature doesn't sit. So they had to agree to this without legislative input, and it was designed that way. So in January 2010, the applications were due. They had to be signed by your governor, and they had to be signed by the state school superintendent, and that's what happened in Idaho. An application was submitted, signed by Governor Otter and the state school superintendent. The standards, interestingly enough, were not even out at that point. So they were agreeing to accept these standards without having seen them. And I'm not going to get into the details of how this worked because Dr. Stotsia is going to talk a little bit about that because she was involved in some of the, observing some of the shenanigans of this. So the final standards were not released until June of 2010. And then the states had 2 summer vacation months when everybody's at the beach to review these standards and to compare them to your previous standards and to consider all of the ramifications of going into this program and getting your State Board of Education to sign off on it. Okay. The legislature was not involved at all in any of these things. Now, Idaho did not get a Race to the Top grant, but the commitments were made in order to get the Race to the Top money. That's the way it was. All right. Another way that the federal government is involved is through the No Child Left Behind waiver. No Child Left Behind was the last disastrous federal education policy, the one immediately preceding the current disastrous federal education policy. to get a waiver, originally they pretty much said you had to adopt Common Core to get a waiver from some of these provisions of No Child Left Behind. Last summer, they decided to give a waiver to Virginia, which does not have Common Core. Virginia withdrew. If you were cynical, you might think that the reason they gave a waiver to Virginia last summer was that Virginia is a swing state, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. But it is possible to get a waiver without having Common Core, and we can talk about how that works. But that's how the federal government is involved. Now, the testing, there were two consortia that were set up to go along with the Common Core standards. These are groups of states that have gotten together, and they're going to develop these tests, these cutting-edge tests that are going to test our children. One is called Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. That's what Idaho is in. The second is Partnership, and so I won't go through all that. It's called PARC. These are the two. Smarter Balanced is the more left-wing weird one of the two, so congratulations. That's the one Idaho is in. It is the content expert, I can't remember what her name is, but anyway, what her title is. Her name is Linda Darling Hammond. She's very big in Smarter Balanced, and she's the one that Bill Ayers thought should be the Secretary of Education under Obama. She didn't get the job, but they let her have the job at Smarter Balanced. So they're doing these tests. So where's the money for that coming from? It's coming from the federal government, $360 million in taxpayer money. And these tests are not going to be just normal tests the way we think of tests. These tests are going to be cutting edge. They're going to be completely online. They're going to have projects and open-ended responses and all of this stuff that's supposed to test all of the deeper conceptual understanding. This whole thing is no buzzword left behind. You will hear these standards are rigorous. They will make our children college and career ready. They will give deeper conceptual understanding. It gets to the point that you just want to say, okay, I've got this. None of these things actually mean anything, but that's what they keep saying. Smarter Balance test will be a computer adaptive test, which means that it adapts to each kid who's taking the test. So if a child gives an answer that's right, the next question that he gets will be a little bit harder. And if he gives an answer that's wrong, the next question will be a little bit easier. So it's all very, very brave new world. Seb knows more about that than I do. Okay. One thing that you will hear over and over, and I'm sure you've heard this in Idaho, is that the standards do not dictate the curriculum. We are still in charge of curriculum at the local level, and it's just standards. They just say what you're supposed to know, what you're supposed to be able to do, but how you get there is completely up to you. Okay. That is not true. The point of standards is to drive curriculum. That is what is happening. Bill Gates, who is, of course, paying for all this, has said we're not satisfied with just standards, with just common standards. We won't be satisfied until we have the curriculum and the tests that align to it. If you look at what the U.S. Department of Education said in 2009 when they released the Race to the Top application, some of the major benefits of common standards will be the coordination of information that could inform the development and implementation of curriculum. And PARC and Smarter Balance, and I didn't get the slide changed in time, I'm sorry, I should have put the Smarter Balance thing in there too. Smarter Balance is developing, with our taxpayer money, they are developing curriculum models. So yes, they're developing curriculum. That is inevitably, and they say they don't tell teachers how to teach. Well, yes, they do. If teachers want to teach standard algorithms instead of fuzzy math in first grade, that's too bad. They can't. They've got to do it the way Common Core tells them to. But I won't get into that because that's what our other two speakers will talk about some. But believe me, we're hearing from teachers all over the country about their level of distress at what they're being told to do. Okay. This is a gentleman, I did a program in Colorado a couple of weeks ago, and we found these quotes from him. He's one of the local school superintendents. And he said, Common Core is a more centralized testing and curriculum system for kids. We will have to teach nonfiction at a high level. And my favorite one was when he said that just letting teachers, exercise, he didn't really put it this way, but he essentially was saying to let teachers exercise their unprofessional judgment in what they teach in their classrooms is no way to run a school. So Common Core really wants to take to create kind of the cookie-cutter approach. And as one colleague of ours, Robert Scott, who's the former Texas Education Commissioner, and Texas never went into Common Core, as he said, it's the Bill Gates view of the world. Think about how Bill Gates made his money. He made his money by creating an operating system that is used by everybody on the planet. It's very efficient. Why can't we do that with education? Why can't we have the Common Core operating system? And we will impose it on every school, and every child will be educated exactly the way every other child is, and it'll be very efficient. Why do we have this local stuff anyway? Why do we have these 50 states? How inefficient is that? It's the computer geek view of the world, and that's where we're going. Is this legal? No, it's not. Under the Constitution, the federal government is not supposed to be doing any of this because they have no role in education. The other thing that you need to remember is that there are 3 federal statutes that prohibit the federal government from supervising, directing, or controlling curriculum. And that is exactly what they are doing. They are supervising, directing, and controlling curriculum, ultimately, especially through testing. So the fact that they're doing all this violates 3 federal statutes, but that's never been a real problem, apparently, to them. Okay, so what does it mean that if you adopt Common Core? Well, under Race to the Top, the commitments that were made, and the agreement that was signed, you implement Common Core word for word. You adopt it word for word. You can add a little bit of content. You can add up to 15% in any subject area, but you can't change anything. You can't delete anything. So what happens when down the road you see that something is not working, like the weird way they're going to teach geometry? It's really not working. The parents see it and the teachers see it. So what do? Well, I use Zed for this too. He asked one time, will Bill Gates have an 800 number that you can call and say, my child is really struggling in geometry. Could we change this? Because there won't be anybody in your state who has the authority to change it. Not if they're going to keep this Common Core. Because things are falling apart, certainly in the testing, they may start letting people out of things. I don't know if they're going to or not. But if they do that, then they defeat the whole purpose. The whole purpose was to have this centralized thing that allows you to compare kids from state to state to state and all that. And if every state is doing its own thing, then you're back where you were. So right now, you've essentially given up control over your English language arts and math. Okay. The standards themselves I will not get into because the next 2 speakers will talk about that, what the quality is. I'll lead into that by telling you that we were in South Carolina last year. We were testifying there, and we had testified about all the legal problems with this and how it was unconstitutional and et cetera, et cetera. And one of the local school superintendent, there were so many, the educational bureaucracy in South Carolina just defies imagination. And this is one of the bureaucrats, and she stood up and she said, I've heard all of this about how this is illegal and it's unconstitutional. And she said, and I don't know about any of that. I don't care about that. I just think the standards are good. And I thought, well, there in a nutshell is what's wrong with our country. You don't care whether this is being done legally, whether this is something that fits with our constitutional republic. But anyway, I'm going to let Dr. Stotsky tell you something about the English standards and how we got there.